Welcome to our deep dive into the world of cults and how they influence people and, the search for meaning, this kind of thing. We've got like a really cool mix of sources for you.
Yeah.
Like we've got some academic analysis and like,
Yeah.
personal accounts from people who've escaped cults and even some reports, like government reports on cult activity.
Wow, that's a lot of stuff.
It is. It is.
Yeah.
And also we're going to be looking at Guru Bhakti Yoga to get like a different perspective,
Right.
like about surrendering to a spiritual guide.
Interesting. Sounds like we'll get a pretty nuanced view of how groups promising spiritual growth can be both alluring and potentially dangerous.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, we're going to tackle some pretty intriguing questions, right? Like, what makes someone vulnerable to being manipulated? How do cults use psychology,
Hmm.
like to actually gain control over people? And, are there any red flags that you should watch out for, when you're like part of a group or an organization?
Good questions. Those are important things to think about.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
To get things started, I think we should just dive straight into this personal account from a woman named Kasia.
Okay, yeah, let's do that.
Yeah.
Her story, as detailed in this Polish source, it really highlights how someone can be drawn into a cult looking for something we all want, right? Belonging and purpose.
Right.
Sadly, her search ended tragically, but it gives us some really valuable insight into the deceptive tactics that these groups employ.
It's pretty heartbreaking,
Yeah.
Kasia was clearly searching for something more in life, a way to like escape her struggles. And she found this group that like offered her all the answers. But what's so unsettling is how her experience like completely lines up with all these psychological techniques that are described in Dangerous Persuaders
Yeah.
and this analysis of destructive cult methods.
It's like they exploit our deep-seated human needs, right?
Right.
Like in Cassia's case, she was drawn to the group's message of unconditional love and acceptance, which is, let's be honest, we all long for, especially if we felt, isolated or judged.
Mm.
But then the manipulators, they twist that natural desire. They
Yeah.
use it to gain control instead of, fostering any kind of genuine connection.
So it's like they're taking, our best intentions, our good qualities, and using them against us.
Yeah.
So like in Katya's example, her desire to help others was manipulated into like working tirelessly for the group, and that was often at the expense of her own well-being, her own health. It's a classic tactic, isn't it?
Oh, yeah. It's disturbingly effective, turning strengths into weaknesses. And this is where things like NLP or neuro-linguistic programming come into play.
NLP.
Yeah. It sounds complex, but essentially it's all about influencing someone's thoughts and behaviors by using language patterns and subtle suggestions.
Interesting.
Yeah. Cult leaders often use NLP to kind of subtly reshape their followers' perceptions of reality.
So it's not like outright brainwashing, it's more like a subtle kind of influence that like slowly takes hold over time.
Precisely. Think of it like a slow drip, a constant drip of suggestion that gradually wears down someone's critical thinking and their independence until they fully embrace the group's ideology. It's really quite chillingly effective. And this is exactly why understanding these techniques is so important. It's about empowering yourself to recognize manipulation when you see it. Whether it's coming from a cult leader, a manipulative friend,
Yeah.
even targeted advertising like you see online.
So it really is true that knowledge is power.
Absolutely.
Speaking of different approaches to influence, we have this text on Guru Bhakti Yoga, which advocates surrendering to a spiritual guide for self-improvement. Seems a little counterintuitive,
Mm.
especially like right after we've been discussing all these manipulative tactics.
I know, right? That's an interesting contrast. But I think the key difference is the intent,
Okay.
and the nature of the relationship. In genuine Guru Bhakti Yoga, the surrender is a conscious choice that's made, for personal growth and spiritual development.
So it's about choosing to follow someone whose teachings like really resonate with you, not just being like, coerced into blind obedience.
Right. That's the crucial distinction. However, even within, seemingly positive spiritual traditions, there's always the potential for abuse.
Right.
It's crucial to ask yourself, like, is this teacher actually encouraging my critical thinking, or are they demanding unquestioning loyalty?
Oh, that's a really good question.
And am I growing as an individual, or am I becoming increasingly dependent on this person and their teachings?
Those are some tough questions,
Yeah.
but they're really important to ask. Like you said earlier, knowledge is power. And even just understanding like the principles of Guru Bhakti Yoga can help us discern, between genuine guidance and potentially harmful manipulation.
Right, exactly. It's all about being an informed seeker. It really is. Now, shifting gears a little bit here, you shared some sources on Chris Butler's group, right?
Right.
And it looks like they've faced a lot of allegations over the years.
They have, yeah.
So before we dive in, can you give us a bit of background, like, who is this Chris Butler guy and what is this organization that he founded?
Sure. So Chris Butler, also known as Siddhi Swarupananda, he founded something called the Science of Identity Foundation
Okay.
back in the 1970s.
Way back.
It's often called the Siddhi Yoga movement. And it's this group that kind of blends, elements of Hinduism like Bhakti Yoga with Western New Age philosophies.
Interesting mix.
Yeah, it is. They claim to offer a path to, self-realization through meditation and chanting and devotion to the guru, which in this case is Butler himself.
So that guru-disciple relationship that we were just talking about.
Exactly.
What kind of allegations has this group faced?
Well, it's a pretty long list, unfortunately.
Yeah.
There are accusations of financial exploitation, emotional abuse, hypocrisy, and even potential connections to criminal activity. We see this over and over again in sources like Chris Butler's Siddhi Swarupananda, Siddhi Swarup, and Fear and Butler's Cult, and several others.
Wow. What are former members actually alleging, like specifically?
So several former members claim that Butler basically used his position as the guru to pressure his followers into donating huge sums of money.
Oh, wow.
Some even say that he demanded that they hand over patents or even control of their businesses. It's interesting because this drive for financial control, it's something we see a lot in cult-related cases.
Yeah, because it makes people dependent on the group, right?
Right.
Isolates them from, outside support.
Exactly.
And it makes it harder for them to leave, of course.
Of course, yeah.
What about the emotional abuse allegations?
So some former members describe the group as having this culture of fear and intimidation.
Yikes.
They say if you question Butler's authority at all, you'd be met with, harsh criticism or even public humiliation.
That's awful.
I know, right? And some people were even expelled from the group altogether. And this lines up with what we know about cults, right?
Mm-hmm.
They create this environment where no dissent is tolerated whatsoever.
Yeah, very controlling.
It's alarming the level of control they try to have over people's lives.
It is. Now, what about those hypocrisy allegations? What's going on there?
Well, there's a pretty stark contrast between Butler's lavish lifestyle and the austerity that he preached to his followers.
Yeah. Oh, so there's a do as I say, not as I do kind of vibe.
Exactly. If you see this picture painted over and over again, he's more interested in, personal enrichment than spiritual guidance.
Mm-hmm.
Multiple sources say this, including those leaked Facebook messages.
Yeah, I was reading about those. There's that quote where he's complaining about followers not giving him enough money while their kids are, quote unquote, surfing. That doesn't really paint a picture of a selfless spiritual leader.
It really doesn't.
Yeah.
No, it doesn't. But, in the interest of fairness, we do have Tulsi Gabbard. She's a pretty prominent politician.
Right.
And she has publicly defended Butler and his teachings. She credits him with guiding her on her spiritual journey, and her spiritual growth. And she says she's never seen any of this abusive behavior that other people have talked about.
That's interesting. Adds another layer to this situation.
It really does.
It's already complicated enough as it is.
Yeah.
I think it's important to, just present this information objectively, like we're doing.
Right.
Not take sides.
Oh, of course not.
And let our listeners form their own conclusions.
Exactly. I mean, maybe Gabbard's experience was genuinely positive, right? Or maybe there are other factors at play that we don't know about.
We may never know.
Yeah, we may never know. But regardless, this whole situation raises some big questions about, the potential for misuse within these spiritual traditions. It makes me think back to that stuff we were reading, cults and deteriorated spiritual systems and Krishna Karunya letter, I think it was called. Those texts talked about how dangerous it can be to oversimplify, complex teachings.
Right, because if you reduce, profound spiritual concepts to sound bites or you present them without the right context, it's easy to distort them
Right.
and then use them to manipulate people.
It's like taking a really complex philosophical text and turning it into a motivational poster.
Yeah, I can see that.
You lose all the nuance.
Right.
You lose all the potential for a deeper understanding of what's really being said.
Mm-hmm.
And, this is exactly when people who are looking for quick fixes or easy answers can be especially vulnerable to this kind of stuff.
Exactly. Which kind of brings us to the broader context of cult activity, right?
Right.
we have this French government report, the Mills report.
Yeah.
It highlights the global reach of these groups, and why people are so concerned about them. Like, they can really have a huge impact on individuals and on society as a whole. It's crazy how they use, front groups and legal loopholes to mask their true intentions.
Yeah. It's a kind of unnerving to think about these groups, potentially like infiltrating institutions and manipulating people on a large scale. It
Yeah.
makes you wonder, like, what can we even do to address this issue? It's so complex.
It's a huge challenge for
Yeah.
sure.
I mean, is it through, new laws or legislation? Is it through education? Like, it feels really overwhelming.
Yeah, it does. But I think, like we said earlier, knowledge is one of the most powerful tools we have, right?
Right.
The more we understand about these manipulative techniques, the better off we'll be. And the warning signs of cult activity,
Yeah, I think so.
the better equipped we are to protect ourselves.
And those around us.
Those around us, exactly.
Okay, so that leads us into the next part of our dive, right?
Right.
This book, How to Break the Cycle of Manipulation. It's got some really practical advice for recognizing and resisting these tactics. And not just in, extreme situations like cults, but just in everyday life.
Right.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here.
Yeah.
We went from personal stories to the psychology of manipulation.
Right.
And then we zoomed out to look at cults operating all over the globe.
Yeah, we did.
It's a lot to process, really. But, this book, How to Break the Cycle of Manipulation, this feels like, the perfect toolkit for us to unpack right now.
Yeah, definitely. What I find fascinating about this book is that it goes beyond, just the extreme situations like cults.
Uh-huh.
It actually shows how those same tactics, the same things we see in cults, how those things can pop up in our everyday relationships.
Oh, like with, family.
Yeah, family, friends, even like in your work relationships with colleagues.
Yeah, I see what you mean. Because, we tend to think of manipulation as something that's really, overtly sinister.
Right?
But it can be way more subtle and pervasive.
Exactly. The book really gets into the head of the manipulator, like what their worldview is like. And it's characterized by this real lack of empathy. And a sense of entitlement, too. Like, they see other people as just tools to be used for their own gain. And, they often justify their actions, however harmful, as being totally necessary to get what they want.
So it's not necessarily about being intentionally malicious, right?
Yeah.
It's more about, like, a skewed perception of how they think relationships should work.
Precisely. And because they just lack that empathy, they often can't even see the harm they're causing, or they just don't care.
Wow.
Which makes them even more dangerous because, they can come across as so charming and persuasive on the surface while they're busy manipulating people, for their own benefit.
So, I mean, what are, like, some of these everyday manipulation tactics that, we should be watching out for? You mentioned some earlier, right?
Yeah, the book talks about guilt trips, playing the victim, anger outbursts, and even the silent treatment.
Oh, yeah, I hate the silent treatment.
It's the worst. It's a control tactic. All of these are ways to kind of control the emotional climate,
Right.
in a relationship, and to pressure someone into doing what the manipulator wants.
Right. So, like, guilt trips are to make you feel bad or responsible.
Yeah, they make you feel responsible for their unhappiness.
Exactly.
Playing the victim is all about garnering sympathy and, avoiding any kind of accountability. Anger, obviously, is meant to intimidate and silence.
Yeah, it's scary.
Yeah, it's meant to be scary.
Right.
And the silent treatment, like we said, it's meant to punish you. And, it's a way to withdraw affection.
Okay, so the key is, like, recognizing these patterns, right?
Yeah.
Understanding what's really motivating the person to do these things. But, that's easier said than done. How do we actually, resist these tactics in the moment?
Well, the book gives some really practical advice. One of the biggest things is to play for time.
Play for time.
Yeah, because manipulators love to create this sense of urgency.
Oh, I see.
Like, they need you to make a decision right now, to kind of push you into making these impulsive decisions.
Right.
But if you take a step back and, just say you need a minute to think, that can disrupt their strategy completely.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
Just don't get swept up in all that emotional pressure.
Exactly. Don't get swept up. But of course, sometimes playing for time just doesn't work.
Right. What happens if they just keep pushing?
Then you've got to set boundaries. Like, you need to clearly and firmly communicate what you will and will not tolerate.
Yeah.
And this often means learning to say no, which can be so hard.
So hard. Oh, my gosh.
Especially if you're, a people pleaser. but it's absolutely essential if you want to protect yourself.
It's so true. That's so true. Saying no can feel impossible sometimes,
Yeah,
but it's so empowering when you do it.
it is.
Because it's like you're reclaiming your own agency. You're not letting someone else, dictate your choices in your life.
Exactly. And remember, it's not selfish to put your needs first. It's actually essential for a healthy relationship.
Okay, so to bring it all back to, what we've been talking about today, cults and influence and manipulation, it seems like there's a common thread here.
All right.
Doesn't matter if it's a charismatic guru or a manipulative partner or even just like a pushy salesperson.
Mm-hmm.
It's all about recognizing when someone's trying to control you
Yes.
for their own benefit, not yours.
Exactly. And, the key takeaway, and we've said this a few times today, is that it's so important to be a little bit skeptical.
Yeah.
Use your critical thinking skills. When someone comes along and they're promising you, all these quick solutions or instant enlightenment or, unbelievable financial rewards, just pause for a second
Right.
and ask yourself, like, why? What's their motivation here?
Yeah, because like that old saying, right? If it sounds too good to be true, it probably is.
Oh, yeah, that's a good one. Still holds up today. But how do we develop that discernment,
Right.
that ability to kind of see through the facade, right? Especially in a world where we're bombarded with information and people are always trying to persuade us.
It's tough. It really is.
It is tough.
So what can we do?
Well, that's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And it's something I hope you'll all continue to think about, even after this deep dive. Like, how can you balance being open-minded
Right.
with a healthy dose of skepticism? How can you stay open to new ideas and new experiences, but without falling prey to people who might want to exploit you?
Yeah. Yeah. It's like a lifelong journey, right?
It
Of
is.
learning and refining our own inner compass.
Absolutely. And hopefully, this deep dive has given you some tools and some insights that can help you along the way.
Definitely. So
Yeah.
remember, everyone, knowledge is power.
Hmm.
Critical thinking is your shield.
Love that.
And trusting your gut, your intuition, that's your guiding star.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
Yeah.
Keep questioning, keep exploring, and most importantly, keep trusting yourself.
Beautifully said. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive, everyone. We'll see you next time.